second round tight end. Like, please stop the nonsense.
I've never seen him picked at the 103, or at least not in Superflex. You can see that potentially in 1QB, but I feel like that's pretty insane. Dude, he's pretty glaring. I think it's Malik Washington, honestly.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Dynasty Underdog draft review. This edition is going to be covering our Dynasty Underdog Listener League 1. This is our first Listener League. Super stoked to get into these. Jake is joining me for a series we're going to do here on our 4 Listener League rookie drafts. Really excited to get into this. We finished them all up in like about a week, maybe just under that. So we sped through these. So the ADPs are going to be interesting because I think they in each league, they kind of change a little bit just based on, each individual finding out more information kind of at their own pace. So I think that, these are different than if you're going to have your rookie draft 2 months from now when everybody else is kind of on the same page or whatever it may be. So let's pull up the draft board so we can see what we're working with. We're going to walk through this, try to do this at a pretty quick pace, not trying to rush it, but we do want to get this to you in a concise format. So we are going to start off just looking at this from a holistic standpoint. Does anything stick out to you, Jake, from like an ADP standpoint versus the draft? Like, is there anything that's like way off here? Because to me, this seems a little substandard compared to what a typical draft would look like.
Yeah, I think the first big one without just like stealing it away from you is definitely going to be Rome Odunze. I've never seen him picked at the 103, or at least not in Superflex. You can see that potentially in 1QB, but I feel like that's pretty insane. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good shout. It's also worth mentioning that something strange happened in this league with that team. The person who picked Rome Odunze shortly thereafter decided that they weren't going to stay in the league. So I don't know if this was like nefarious. The person who left the league didn't do things by normal standards, I would say, in terms of the picks they made, the trades they made. So this may have been like what they wanted to do, but it was an unfortunate situation because the person did end up leaving the league. And we fortunately were able to find somebody who was totally okay with the situation, picked it up right in the middle of the draft, no problem, and ended up doing a pretty good job thereafter. But I just wanted to mention that this wasn't necessarily the plan for that team, or it may not have been the plan for the team that took over, but it was something that happened early on that we had to deal with. So that Odunze pick is definitely very, very out of the ordinary. I think another one to shout out is probably Marshawn Lloyd in the opposite direction, going way just incredibly late at 4-1. You see that happening. Then you see kind of, even the hot player like Kamani Vidal, he goes, I think, a little early in this draft, right? Like,
yep.
We're jumping the shark a little bit. So really my point being in this being kind of like substandard per ADP is that it's a little all over the place. There's values that are falling. It's not typically what you would see if you just go on to like Dynasty Data Lab and you're looking at the ADP. It's just a little off. So we can move on from the ADP talk. Tell me about a player in this draft you think was picked far too high and why.
Yeah, dude, he's pretty glaring. I think it's Malik Washington, honestly. Like, he's just kind of a guy who's right now sitting in the middle of the board at the 306. And I'm just saying to myself, there are a ton of other assets, like even a Jalen Polk. I'm not necessarily high on Jalen Polk, but, situation screams to me significantly better. Luke McCaffrey. There's just so many other wide receiver options that I think were more valuable, even a McMillan after him, that I just kind of sit there and say to myself, how was Malik Washington the most valued wide receiver at that spot for the person who picked him?
I mean, there definitely could be some fan bias there, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, we know that this manager is a Dolphins fan, so could be, intrigued by the profile, which Malik Washington is a guy we like for sure, but him falling so late into the draft, I agree with you, just not worth it here. So for me, I'm looking at the pick right after Malik Washington, and I'm looking at Theo Johnson, who certainly has an intriguing profile, no doubt, but this is a guy who he's been picked almost in every draft I've seen, but he definitely could either hit waivers or you could maybe try to find a way to trade into the 4th round and grab him if you really wanted him. But he's just not a target who I think I'm looking to reach on, right, for any reason. Like, he is an interesting player. Again, he has the Giants job kind of in front of him with Darren Waller retiring. We are kind of forgetting about who's the tight
Daniel
end that I
Bellinger.
actually, yes, Daniel Bellinger, who is a decent player. Like, he can catch the ball and he can block. And there are still questions about whether Theo Johnson can do both of those things based on his college portfolio. So I just think we could have gone a Ray Davis here. We could have gone a McMillan here, Lloyd here. Like, there's a ton of options that I think should have gone ahead of Theo Johnson, and you could have picked another tight end later or on waivers. So that's, for me, the player that was picked too high. What about a player that was picked far too low?
Yeah, I think you just said their name, but I'll say both Marshawn Lloyd and Luke McCaffrey, both kind of falling into that fourth round. And it's really important to note, we didn't note this before, but we do have a fifth round here. And those two picks in the fifth round are actually supplemental picks for the second. So you're talking about the 213 and the 214, which really adds 2 picks to those picks. So Marshawn Lloyd 401 is really a 403. Luke McCaffrey sitting at the 405 is a 407. Like, that's just crazy. Like, that's just crazy value. Amazing to get either of those players where they did. And yeah, I think those are the two that fall too low. What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I traded up here to secure Luke McCaffrey. I may have had that pick, but I'm pretty sure I traded up a couple picks because I was just like, this is enough is enough. Or, no, I didn't. I didn't trade. I was just really hoping that Dan, NFS football, didn't take him there, because I was just thinking to myself, top 100 pick, top 100 pick. I just kept hitting my mind like, why are we not taking this guy? And so I think that should be in the back of our minds always with, in terms of late round picks. If you're going to find a guy in there who has draft capital that is, around 2 rounds above anybody even around him here, like, you need to be targeting that player just for the upside alone. So, yeah, totally agree with that. For me, Ben Sennett is a guy who I do want to highlight here, because I think the third round is too late for him. Just bottom line for me. He's not, there's other guys maybe we could have mentioned here, but I do think that Sennett going at the supplemental pick being essentially 214, right? So that would be 302.
Yep.
It's just, I think he should be going over Burton, Jalen Wright, AD Mitchell, Troy Franklin, and even potentially Blake Corum, Roman Wilson. Like, there's a case for all of those guys to be behind Sennett, which is why I think he was far too low. That's just my reasoning there. Second round tight end, like, please stop the nonsense. Please. Okay. This may be the same answer throughout the drafts, so we'll see if we touch on it after this. But what do you think is the position to target in this draft, like the most valuable position to find here?
Yeah, I found that a lot of the late end running backs were just sitting at really good value, honestly. Like, if you're looking at especially the fourth round, almost every one of those running backs I'd rather take over the wide receivers that were taken in that round, except for Luke McCaffrey. And so if you're able to get onto a guy like a Will Shipley, where, his role is probably going to be secondhand to Saquon, I still think that he's more valuable than a Tez Walker, personally. Estime, Tracy, Marshawn Lloyd, like, those are the types of values that you want to find. Even Ray Davis, he goes mid of the third round. He's a dude that you'll find in a lot of drafts, not going until like the 405, 406 range. And so those are the types of guys that you want to be targeting, especially late in your rookie drafts, because there's a lot of upside to those types of players versus, a fourth, fifth round wide receiver who probably won't make it into the field.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I don't think that this draft in particular presents any opportunity otherwise for, a position overall. So I think that that's a good target. Speaking to this draft board specifically, what about the biggest mistake of the draft for you? I mean, we all make mistakes, so we're not trying to dog anybody here, but I do think it's worth kind of looking at this and discussing, what the best worst decisions were. So what do you think about your biggest mistake of this draft?
Yeah, mine's going to be pretty controversial, but I'm going to say Michael Penix. And this is a conversation that Billy and I have had offline quite often. I think Penix's situation is really, really lucrative at the end of the second round for someone who's selecting him. But at the beginning of the second round, for a fact that you have an asset that isn't going to increase in value for at least 2 years. And you now know that increase in value for you is basically the 112, 201. And being stuck at that value puts you in a much harder place to try and make a profit off of him. And really one of those things that you're going to be holding on to, I think, for a little bit longer than you really want to, versus the guy who goes up next, who's Bo Nix, who I think realistically has 1 or 2 good weeks, you easily can flip him for that first that you're not going to be able to get on Penix for at least 2 seasons. So that's kind of where my head's at. What about you?
That's a great shout, honestly, because I think that is maybe the highest I've seen Penix go in any of our drafts. We'll go through this, but I'm pretty confident that was good shout there. Theo Johnson for me is going to come up again here. I know it's far too high, but also the biggest mistake because I think there's a lot more opportunity around him here where like you could get actual NFL players. You know what I mean? Like even Jalen Polk like was going. That's way too late for Jalen Polk. We didn't even talk about him really, but even if you don't believe in Polk, 3.9 is far too late. And I think there's guys here who are going to have a role or are much more likely to have a role. So for me, Theo Johnson is just a guy. I mean, maybe I'm going to look stupid talking about this, honestly, because it's not like super egregious. Like it's the third round, middle of the third round. Like, okay. But he just seems like such a dart throw that I just would like to see him either off of waivers or in the fourth round personally. So that's why I feel it was the biggest mistake. There's just much more opportunity there.
Totally.
Okay, what about the best draft? Who do you think in this draft had the best draft?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of hard because there's a few people in this draft that have a lot of draft capital and that helps them kind of manipulate the board a little bit better. But this was someone who actually didn't have a lot of draft capital, and I thought it was FF Doormat sitting in at the 111. And really, I just thought he capitalized off of value really well. I think getting BTJ at the 111, getting Xavier Legette at the 211, and then getting Marshawn Lloyd, which we said is basically the 403, is just basically hitting profit on almost every single player. I do think that BTJ is probably equivalent in my mind to the 110, 109. So if I could potentially trade for him, putting in a situation where there's a profit there, I think Legette in some leagues, you could probably already get a mid-second for him. And there might be someone even in the league silly enough to potentially trade for that. That's profit. And Marshawn Lloyd, it's going to take maybe 2 weeks into the NFL season. You could probably start looking at mid, early, third, maybe even late second. So that's the way that I saw that FF Doormat had the best draft. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good shout as well. Like when I looked at your answer here, I was looking at it, I was like, yeah, he was a value hawk here. He just took every bit of value that fell to him and didn't really whiff. So I think that's a great one for me. I'm going to go with the 101 here, DTB, our boy Dylan. This guy's been stacking up picks in every league forever, but I just think this was a pretty sharp draft. I mean, he didn't really need to do much. He was in a good position to do it, but I still think that he made pretty good picks for the most part. The first round is just electric, hard to get away from that. The only pick you could question is the Jalen Wright pick, who we like here for sure, but I do think you could have made a case for first round wide receiver in Legette to go there, but it's not the most egregious pick. And I think that he had a good draft overall and kind of just went chalk, and that went well for him here. And I mean, getting getting Malik Neighbors here, the mistake that was made here, we'll call it, really served him well. And it's unfortunate for the league, I guess, at some level, but we can't say that the other person, that anybody wouldn't do that. Like some people just might do that. That might be what they think. But for us, that's not what we think. But it worked out really well for Dylan, and I think he had one of the better drafts because of it. Okay, so we went over the best draft here. Who do you think had the worst draft for DU1?
Yeah, honestly, it's going to be our boy Josh. Unfortunately, I think his draft was just he got assets that I don't necessarily dislike. I just think the values on them and the players that went around them just don't really make sense. So we already talked about Malik Washington. I think Jatavian Sanders or JT Sanders is okay in the mid-third. That's not an issue. But the Spencer Rattler pick at basically the 213 is just, in my mind, bonkers. You're sitting there. Ben Sinnott is right after him. You're sitting there looking at Kamani Vidal. You're sitting there looking at guys like Javon Baker. Like, there's just too much other value on the board that I just don't really get Spencer Rattler there. I can understand Spencer Rattler, mid to late third, but it just, those types of picks compound for me to kind of highlight this as being the worst draft. What about you?
Yeah, and again, we're not trying to dog anybody. It's more really meant to be educational. Like we're literally just, trying to dissect this draft and kind of how it went and learn from it, right? And that's the idea here. So I kind of agree with you. That was a rough one. I think that the Spencer Rattler pick kind of makes it one of the, makes it a candidate for this category. But I wonder if some people, and if his thought here was like, this is a supplemental pick and it's kind of free. Let me just take whatever. I don't think that's the way you should go about it, but I just wonder if that might have been part of the mindset, just putting it out there. My pick for the worst draft was Puma Drew here. I don't get really the Jordan Travis at 310. I get that, he was a decent prospect. The injury killed his draft stock. He's behind an old injured quarterback. So I get all that. But then Shipley at 408 was, it's fine. And then Jaheim Bell at 410, like just nothing really exciting here. I don't think that there was, taking advantage of values necessarily here, fading Marshawn Lloyd. Will Shipley is probably the best value he got, but I just don't love the group that he kind of constructed here and how it went for him and how he went about it. So that's my idea. I don't love, I think really what we should hone in on there is kind of forcing these quarterbacks too early, like Spencer Rattler and Jordan Travis. I don't think we need to force the quarterbacks at all. You can get them in the 4th round, even in sharp leagues. I was just in a league with a bunch of analysts, and I got Spencer Rattler middle, late 4th round. So it's definitely possible. So with that, I think we covered the draft pretty thoroughly. I do want to throw out one other thing before we get out of here. A trade did go down for JJ McCarthy. I traded for him, but I think it's just kind of an interesting trade really quickly to touch on. The trade ended up being, I had the 110. I traded the 110 and the 209 for the 108 and the 306. I was surprised I got that deal done. That's where I'm coming from. I was surprised I got that deal done. And it just feels like people are willing to fade quarterbacks in this draft. And as we, not this specific draft, in the 2024 class, they're willing to fade the quarterbacks in the 1st round beyond their ADP, not like forever, but beyond their ADP a little bit with JJ McCarthy and Drake May. And we're going to see that in some of the subsequent drafts we talk about after this in this little mini series we're doing here. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that. What did you think of that trade? I threw a trade up on the bottom of the screen here one more time. It's the 110 plus the 209 for the 108 plus the 306.
All in all, if you just look at what the actual assets turn into, I think is also kind of helpful just to kind of see what value is going to be there moving forward. Obviously, Billy didn't have the understanding of what that value was at the time, but being able to get a quarterback in Superflex, regardless if you like JJ McCarthy or not, trading him for what looks like McConkey and Pearsall, and adding at the 306.
I traded that 306 and I moved back and ended up getting Jalen McMillan at the end of the round.
Perfect. So I'm guessing I think I picked up plus. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I got 311 plus. I think it was that maybe 405 where I got McCaffrey. I think that's what happened.
Oh, awesome. So if you were to put that into a vacuum, JJ McCarthy, McMillan, and McCaffrey for McConkey and Pearsall, I'm definitely going to go quarterback in Superflex. And I think that's to Billy's point, is that you are able to capitalize on acquiring quarterbacks for relatively low cost here, because the reality is JJ McCarthy midseason, if he's performing even relatively well, will be more expensive than a first and a late second, or a late first and a late second. So I think when you can take advantage of that on the clock, by all means, do it.
Love it. Love it. Love it. All right, guys, we're going to get out of here on that note. Jake, thank you as always for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed this edition of the DU Draft Reviews. We will be back for our second review, so please stay tuned. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and thanks for tuning in. Peace out.